So we talk a lot at Mindshare Partners about the example of leadership, which Kelly mentioned a lot this morning, and the amazing change that can make when people, leaders of teams, leaders of organizations are open and lead through strength and vulnerability. They have the power to turn a taboo topic into a discussable one and to start that culture change. At Mindshare Partners, we often talk about name, normalize, and navigate. So if you want to get to the point where you're really managing mental health at your organization, you have to start by saying the words. Mental health, sharing stories to a point where it becomes normal to talk about, and then gets to a point where you can navigate it well. So, diving in. Jason, I'd love to start hear from you. You've been really open about your story in widespread publications and also your work. Can you just talk about the impetus for that and what that's looked like since then?
Sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me. This is an awesome opportunity for everybody to see how many people there are that go through this. I mean, when everybody stood up, when the question was asked, who has dealt with mental illness of some sort, and everybody stood up, it kind of gave me chills a little bit, in a good way. Because, that's how big it is. I mean, we're disconnected, and I think that was the impetus behind me writing about it and talking about it openly to everybody that came to me or anybody that wanted to hear it, because I wanted everybody to feel more connected. So I wrote my first article in Fast Company around my own anxiety, and I think the title was like, I'm a CEO, I raise millions of dollars, and I have general anxiety disorder. And it got shared tens of thousands of times, like multiple venture capital firms and different startups and people that I respected wrote me and emailed me, and I was like, wow, this is real. Like, this is something that we can connect with. And at that point, it was like an aha moment of like, yeah, like I'm going through my own struggles, but being open about it can not only help other people as the emails came in and I was answering questions on general anxiety disorder and how I deal with it, but also helped me to share. It made me feel more human. It made me feel more open. It made me feel more connected. And it really inspired me to get out there and tell my story, because life is hard. And we're going to go through some hard shit. It's not going to be easy, especially when you're trying to start a business, and being respectful of the people that work inside other organizations that they didn't start as well. Everybody's got struggles, but I do believe that you're on the right side of history if you start talking about these things. And I do believe that once we start talking about it and we feel more connected, it takes away a lot of the anxiety. And so I'm here, and I'm willing, and I want to help everybody I can by sharing my story, and be open enough for everybody else to tell me theirs. So,
thank you. Meredith, I want to jump to you. I know we're going to hear a little bit more from you later, but I'd be curious to hear sort of how you decided to bring your personal story into your professional story, and how that's changed the mental health conversation at work, at Zillow Group, and elsewhere.
It did not feel like a choice. That is the bottom line for me. I had been going through a lot of career changes. I worked at 4 different startups in 4 years. It was incredibly stressful. I had no idea, and I'll talk more about this later, but I had no idea why I was experiencing the physical pain I was experiencing, why I was fainting, why I had migraines constantly. And then I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. And in my return into a normalized work pattern, like finding a job where I could fit, I realized I had to find a job where I genuinely fit. And so I had to start writing about anxiety. I echo a lot of what Jason said. I think that talking about it is the path towards to feeling better with it, to living with it. And I found that in order to find the right job that would fit me, it had to be a place where I could talk about it. So that is one reason, to find a job that fits. And the other reason is social media. I had been writing about these topics. I had been incorporating them into my own social media. And every place that I was interviewing and everyone that I was meeting would want to look at that. I mean, there's no way to separate your social media from the rest of your life. And so I found that for simplicity and just for clarity, I had to merge my worlds. I couldn't put one off to the side.
Thank you. Robert, I'd love to hear you, like many of the folks in the room, have had a career in HR and led and started and built HR at multiple companies. I'd love to hear both about your story and also how your decision weighed as an HR leader and the implications of that.
Yeah, definitely. So hi, folks. I'm Robert, and I think like a lot of people, it wasn't a choice at some point. I spent so much time as an HR generalist or HR business partner counseling people who were coming to me with either diagnosable conditions they were talking to me about, or ones that seemed like they were definitely underlying and they were affecting their performance. And I felt sometimes like a fraud if I didn't sometimes just say, hey, I got this too. I'm dealing with this issue. And I noticed that really changed the dialogue. People were no longer scared to be like, oh, is he gonna believe me? Because even I would always feel that in my own skin, being like, how can I tell somebody I have depression and not just think that anytime I'm feeling anything, they're gonna look at me and think, oh no, he's fragile, he's gonna break. Or something like that, or just constantly under reading. But then I realized, I'm not doing those things. I'm not judging those people. Why can't I actually empathize with them more directly? And it came to a head when I was working at a very big company based in Menlo Park, and I was leading an HR team, and I was put on two special projects on mental health, actually. One was to help improve mental health services at this giant company because we're facing a lot of issues from people going on constant leave of absences due to the stress level. And I was separately then placed as the sort of, if someone attempts suicide at the company, I was the point person to make sure we had a plan. And once that actually happened, luckily they were not successful in their attempt, but realizing that this is such a huge issue, the fact that we had to put a team and a process together for something like this I was like, I have to do more than just talk about it one-on-one with people. So when I was at my next company, we brought in mindshare partners and did a bunch of really exciting mental health education projects. And then during one of the sessions, I was just like, oh yeah, me too, I have depression. It wasn't really planned. It wasn't, I probably should have planned it better. But it just felt natural to say, this is real, and anyone at this company can come and talk to me. And, it was more intimate. It was a company about 200, 300 people, and I could say, hey, the HR leader here has this. You can talk to me about it. I want to destigmatize it by talking about myself. And I've been sort of just doing that ever since.
Stacey, going to you, I'd love to hear, I know there was a firm meeting that you participated in the fall where you and several other leaders at MoFo shared their stories. And I'd also love to hear what you shared with me more about sometimes it's easy to talk about mental health only as a diagnosable condition, but as we've heard about, it's not always, whether because someone chooses not to get diagnosed or they don't know. And so I'd love to hear just more about that conversation.
Yeah, so hopefully I'm not squealing. There was a panel that we decided to do, and I actually was supposed to moderate the panel. I don't think I told you that. I wasn't supposed to be a speaker on the panel, but what was going on in the legal profession, and this probably comes as no surprise, but there's been a lot of highly publicized suicides among law firm partners. And my firm, Morrison Foerster, firm leadership, we really want to get we don't want to ever be in the position where we don't have control over it, obviously, but we want to be the most supportive environment that we can. And the levels of, stress and dissatisfaction and unhappiness among attorneys is quite high. So we were kind of exploring how to deal with this and decided to do a panel where the chair of our firm and myself, I lead the litigation department in San Francisco, would interview partners that were willing to talk about their own challenges with mental health. And we wanted 3, we had 2 people sign up, 1 backed out, couldn't find another one. And I kept talking to people and they were like, well, yeah, I don't have a mental health thing. And I was like, everybody has a mental health thing. It's like saying I don't have a physical health thing. And so anyways, we were on a planning call and I was like, well, you can interview me. I won't be a panelist. I won't be a moderator, I'll be a panelist. So it wasn't really my intention or my plan or anything for no particular reason, just because, I didn't have some kind of desire to talk freely about it. But, and my own issues, who knows what is undiagnosed. But for me, the way that mental health issues and stress manifest themselves are in physical ways. And so when I was a more junior associate, I had pneumonia 4 times in like a 5-year period, like significant back problems, a lot of different challenges that, I was always kind of advised and told to downplay because it didn't, put me on the path to success at the law firm or what have you. And, for me, I had to really learn how to put myself first and take care of myself and deal with my own, stress and challenges. And so that was what I talked about at this panel. And to your point, Jen, after the fact, I had a lot of really positive feedback from people about how much they could relate to what I said, but also some people that said to me, well, it's really interesting, but that wasn't really a mental health issue that you were talking about. Like, you don't really have like a mental health issue. And I was like, really? Is that the case? So, I think part of the issue from my perspective is that people view mental health as like mental illness. And mental health is this, in my mind, it's a continuum. I mean, you might not have a diagnosed mental health condition, whether, it's undiagnosed or diagnosed, or whether it's not, it doesn't fall into the rubric of some kind of medical diagnosis. But it's like physical health. Like, you can be unhealthy and not have a particular illness. And so it's really important for me in my workplace to get people talking about mental health in a way that, this is something that we all deal with. It's relevant to all of us on different ways on a continuum, and not make it be something that's like so attached to, very specific categories.
Labeling.
Yeah, labeling.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. I'd love to open the discussion up between you. As was mentioned in one of the questions, and also is probably just on everyone's mind, this is hard. and obviously folks here today have been really open and have had great success and things come out of it. But there are barriers. So I'd love to just open the discussion about what have you seen those barriers being? How do you respond? And what advice do you have for others thinking about this?
So from my own personal experiences, when you're going out to raise capital, you kind of have to instill this like super person type of quality that you can get everything done that comes your way. I mean, really, when you're developing a company, you're like chief problem everything officer, right? It's not CEO, it's like chief everything officer, all the shit you got to deal with, and everything that comes to you. And if you're open about anxiety in that world, especially when you're trying to raise capital, you're trying to build a team, you're trying to instill confidence that you can execute certain things. If there's a kink in your armor, if somebody sees it as a kink in your armor, it could be very problematic for you to move forward with people that would support you. I mean, that's the number one thing, right? It's like, how do I get people to lead? How do people follow me? And I'm displaying, like a quasi weakness, right? And like what I've learned, because that's the problem, right? What I learned is that it's not a weakness, right? It's something that everybody goes through. It's something very natural. You could label it whatever you want. Each and every one of us has a form of it. And it's actually, you're more powerful talking about it. You're more of a human, and you're more courageous talking about the problems you're having. If you're going to solve other problems, you might as well solve this problem, right? And being open about this problem is like the ultimate problem because you can't see it, right? It's something you can't even... when I was open about my general anxiety disorder and I wrote about it, the most common response that I got from people that knew me was like, really? Like, you got your shit like all together. And it was sort of like, in one way it was like a compliment, and in the other way it was like, I do have my shit together. What's going on with you? Like, I'm open. Let's all be open, So what I found is that the bolder you are about the real problems that are going on inside you, the more authentic you are about them, not only will you lead, but you'll lead the right people who respect you. I think that's That's a huge point, that I've learned in my career. So.
I love that point. I was fired from one of those startups that I mentioned. When I was fired, the person who was firing me said, "You seem depressed." And I was silent, and I remember my eyes just sort of like unfocused, and I looked out, and he was right. He shouldn't have said it, but he was right. I was depressed. And what I realized over subsequent experiences was that if I didn't understand how I felt, and I didn't understand my own narrative just to support exactly what you're saying, that's when I was vulnerable. Yeah. If I didn't explain to someone, I get sick, sometimes I get migraines, this happens to me, yes, I fainted, it's nothing to be fearful of, they will create their own story. And so I cannot impress upon you enough the importance of knowing yourself or helping others know themselves to the point where they can own their stories, because others will make it up otherwise.
I don't know if any of the other HR people were like, "Oh God, someone said that? You said depress in the exit? Oh no, that's such a liability."
Crazy stuff.
I know, I work in HR and startups.
Having the same reaction.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably worse than me. But yeah, I mean, for me, the analogy of the difficulty is, so I'm pretty open about being gay, working in San Francisco. I don't, whatever. I don't have to think twice about it. But I felt like it was a whole nother coming out process when it came to my mental health stuff, to really go and say, okay, why can I share this part of myself, but I can't share this part of my, this other layer because I'm more scared of the judgment. I don't want to be the gay and this. I don't want to be this, that person. And then I realized how many similarities there were, because it's not necessarily inherently visible. Well, I mean, you might know I'm gay, but in general, but you don't know I'm necessarily depressed or anxious. But being able to go around and share those things, and feeling that anxiety, like, oh, someone might view me really differently after they know this about me. They're going to second guess what they think about me. They're going to do this, and in that sense, I was like, oh. Just like I had to come out because I had to be myself, I can come out about this, and this can make me more of myself and make me stronger in who I am. But it took me, I came out when I was 20. It took me another probably 10 plus years to really start being able to come out about this in a more genuine way.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't know when it became, or maybe it's always been, like a fault to be human. And all of us have I have fertility issues, and when I was going through fertility treatment, it was similar. Like I was terrified that anyone was gonna find out. I was like traveling with needles with like partners, hoping they didn't think I was like a drug addict because I didn't want to tell them. I mean, it's just, I find it really interesting that at least, in some professions, the message is that if you communicate to anybody about your challenges, irrespective of what they are, it makes you less good, or it makes you sort of less qualified to give advice or do whatever it is that you're doing. For me, in terms of barriers in the organization, I mean, one thing that I've been focused on is trying to help people understand that in addition to this just being the right thing to do, there are really valid, business reasons and other reasons. Like, we lose really good people because they think that they can't hack it in a particular environment. Whereas, if people were speaking openly, and if everybody knew that, we've all dealt with these challenges at different points in our lives, and, there are resources and there are flexible options, and if people were speaking openly about their challenges and how they've made it work in their own lives, we wouldn't be losing really, really great people who just have decided to opt out. Yeah. And so I think that there are real valid business reasons, in addition to it's the right thing to do, and there's no reason why we should be kind of not acknowledging that we're human and that we face challenges.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Stacey, certain professions or environments that have cultures that seem totally anathema to this idea of being open and vulnerable. And I can imagine some people in this room going, yeah, well, that worked for you, but you're, at this level, or you're at this industry or this type of company. And so I'd love to hear any thoughts on that. Is there a difference? Obviously there is. How real is that? How do people weigh, their given circumstance and their choice to be open? And are there first steps to take to test it out if they're not going to write in Fast Company about their experience?
My immediate thought as you asked that question was, if you were working in a company that hated women, would you say to yourself, well, it's good for you that you're in a company that likes women, but my company, we just don't like women? I mean, it is unacceptable. I really feel it is unacceptable. It is a thing of the past. It will become a thing of the past. We in this room will help it become a thing of the past. So if you are sitting at your table and you're thinking, yeah, my company is just more retro. It's just got more of a like hierarchy to whatever. It's time to change it.
That's what's up.
I do think, I do think like when you're talking about a professional services industry, and it's not because, people, it's the challenges that we face in our day to day. This is actually I think the question that I wrote down on my sticky note, but they're very client driven. And so if your client calls you at Friday afternoon and, me as a partner and says, we just got a subpoena and I need like people over here tomorrow interviewing witnesses and I need, 20,000 documents reviewed by Monday morning and the government's going to show up here, your answer isn't like, no, instead I have to call 15 people on my team and say, really sorry, your weekend just got ruined, I'm really sorry. And so there are definitely aspects of professional services and like client-driven work in that way and this is a barrier that I face internally, because it's like, we need to change things and we need to be more cognizant of the way we manage people and create an environment that's more conducive to mental health. And it's like, we don't set court deadlines, we don't issue the subpoena, like we don't set it's client driven, it's court driven. And so I do think that there are challenges in terms of the implementation of programs to improve things. And I also think that creates a little bit of a barrier, an easy way for people to just say, it's not realistic in what we do. And so for me, it's really challenging. And the fact that I don't see anyone else here from, a law firm or in a professional services industry, I think is a little bit indicative. It's unclear to me how much engagement there is in those industries in seeking this kind of change. Yeah.
So I have a question for everybody here. How many people have professional therapists that if you're willing to share? I feel like, okay, cool. Because I feel like this is a really good point, right? Like life is what happens when you're busy making plans. Like we like to live in like a utopian world where everyone accepts us for who we are, but it's just not that way, right? And I do feel an immense amount of privilege to be able to speak about these things, and I use it as a platform because I have that privilege, right? But I feel like just like you're preparing, right? Like you're doing other shit, besides coming here, right? You're seeing a therapist, you're talking about it, because when life hits you with the shit that it's going to hit you with, that you prepare yourself. My friend's like, just like working out, my friend's like, I wouldn't hang out with you if we had a zombie apocalypse because you'd take me down, I'm like, yeah, probably right. I'm like, at the gym, I'm like, gotta get ready for a zombie apocalypse, But life is a zombie apocalypse, Especially, at the level of detail when it comes to the things that we have to do with in correlation to our capacity to do them, given the fact that we have, the mental things that we go through. So my advice around this type of things, because, we all have our share of shit, is prepare for it, right? You come here, you talk about it, it's inspirational. But you really have to go home and think about, most people raised their hands, so that's awesome. But for those of you who didn't and stood up, go see someone. It's really amazing to get, an unobjected view of what's going on in your life right now from a professional standpoint. So,
I think just something that I thought about was, the idea of, you're in this position, I remember very much thinking about, I'm not sure I can be a manager. I'm not sure I can be a leader. If I have this thing going on with me, if I'm in a depressive episode for a few months, can I really be someone's manager? Can I actually handle that? Can I deal with someone coming to me with their issues constantly in HR? Whatever thing is going on. We too have our 5 o'clock, Friday things, but they're maybe not quite as intense, but it seems like everything happens on a Friday afternoon. But, just those things, am I gonna be ready for this? And then realizing that I had to make a choice. I could say, okay, I'm gonna let this hold me back. I'm gonna stop this, I know that this is my comfort zone and I'm not gonna step out of it. But then I also knew I had ambitions and I thought ability, and I could do this. And I shouldn't let this hold me back. Just like I wouldn't, just like anyone else with a disability, I shouldn't let this hold me back. But I still struggle. Sometimes I go, ooh, with that imposter syndrome. If I'm having a hard day or whatever, I go, I'm not good enough for this, or I'm faking it to everybody. But then once you get in HR long enough, you realize everyone's faking it. And then you sort of go, oh, okay, everyone's got their stuff going on. I can let it either hold me back or I can use it to make me more human to the people that I work with.
I love the point about the client focus, and I love the point about you have to prepare. And I remember feeling the same thing before I had a child. I remember thinking, I can't be a mother. I can barely get out of bed. And what I've learned is that the trade-offs are real. The trade-off to take that client-facing job that will steal your weekends for whatever reason, for a paycheck, for ambition, for fulfillment, means that something else has to go. Similar to talking to a therapist, I think acknowledging the trade-offs, that my husband, for example, in my case, only works half-time, and we have less money than other people we know. These are very real issues, and this is where interesting stuff happens, is what those trade-offs are and how we decide. And I think those are great things to get into around workplace and mental health, but I think you guys have really set that up in what you've been talking about.
I want to dive into a couple of things, but first, stepping back a little bit, we find when we see leaders talking about their mental health, it's often a lot easier to talk about in the past tense because you're telling a story of triumph. It was not hard for me to be like, so I was pregnant, I had depression, but now I'm great. Like, that's not really hard. It's harder to say like, well, I think it's gone, but like, I don't know. Like, sometimes I have these days and I'm like, well, maybe it's not gone, or I'm pregnant again, maybe it's gonna happen again. So talk to us about how you talk about present tense, stuff that doesn't have like a nice, neat tie-in.
So I have chronic depression and anxiety. So for me, it's never like a past tense. It's like when? When will this happen? And how severe will it be? And how do I manage it day in and day out? Because for me, it's never really gone, as scary as that is, but I have to kind of accept that. If I wanted to say, oh yeah, I feel like I have to say like my depression's in remission or something on some level. But a few weeks ago, I didn't leave the house all weekend. I just didn't. I was having, it was kind of in my head. I felt super, I have physical effects of this stuff too. And I just was like, no, I'm going to sleep all day. I'm going to sleep the entire weekend. And yeah, it still exists. The question is knowing like, okay, all right, when those things happen, how do I intervene with myself and being like, all right, well, you're going to get to work today. What's going to be the last thing you want to do is go for a walk. Make yourself go for a walk anyways. You will feel better. This, getting back into that discipline of, all right, these are the things will make you feel better. All right, you slept all weekend, you had a tough time, work your way out of it. But it's a constant sort of check-in on those things. And also knowing some days that, I can't work my way out of it. I don't have that power. So I'm like, all right, today's not a day I'm going to be able to work functionally. Sorry. And giving myself that permission and knowing that, as opposed to maybe if I try to tough it out that day, I actually will make maybe worse decisions or prolong this issue. So it's being able to give myself that care when I really need it.
As you know, Jen, in the past few weeks, I've been shopping around a book proposal. And I've been meeting with a lot of book publishers. And it's interesting to have to present information as though it's not an ongoing thing every single day. So I'd meet with the book publishers, come home at night, have a sleepless night, start itching because of eczema, stress-related eczema. And to me, that is just part of daily life. There is nothing past tense about any of this. This is a moment of a flare, and then we keep going. And that it's worth doing, again, trade-offs. It's worth talking to publishers. It's worth doing that stuff, even though there will be a payment that comes due around it.
I was thinking in my head, like, how to tell you, everybody in this room, that I have anxiety every day and how I deal with it. And I was saying to myself, you know, everybody has different levels of anxiety, right? You can label it all you want, right? But to your point, but this is how I deal with it, right? And my levels might be different than yours, but what works for me, I actually use it to my benefit. You know, I consciously am aware of my anxiety, and I consciously say to myself, am I going to let this stop me, right? And then I think to myself, I said, well, if I'm not going to let this, I don't want it to stop me, so how do I turn it into energy? And some of the best things that ever happened in my life were a byproduct of me answering the call to getting rid of my anxiety. And that's why I like to talk about it, because I want to tell everybody that given the different levels, you know, and you might not be able to do this, but if you can, it's been an unbelievable practice to me to look at it as my friend, you know, rather than look at it as my enemy, and for it to turn around and use it as a force. Has anybody seen that movie Wanted? Like, where it's Angelina Jolie and like, it's like, I don't know, it's like this crazy movie that can shoot bullets around and do all this shit. Yeah, Wanted.
Literally no one.
I was like, whoa,
Not one person.
it's probably a New York thing.
Oh,
You know,
okay, one person.
you know. Well, anyway, in the movie, I'm not going to go over the plot because we don't have that much time. That's what he does, right? He has this extreme amount of anxiety, and they're like, no, listen to your anxiety and formulate a plan where you can use it as energy. And I think about that in my head, not the movie all the time, but that was just, go out and watch it, it's awesome. And that's what I'm able to do. And that's, again, part of the reason why I love to share these stories with people, because sometimes people come to me and they're like, oh shit, like I did that and it worked. And that makes me feel even better and more connected, so.
So we called this panel Leaders Go First because of that obvious power, but it's just first. And we're talking today about culture change and about changing the conversation in our companies and cities. So I'm curious if you could tell us more about what needs to happen and what have you seen happen to take one person sharing a story and take it to a company culture.
That's why I'm here. I'm hoping you'll tell me. I mean, so I can just talk a little bit about the changes that, you know, I've seen just since we had this town hall meeting, which is that I've had so many people come to me and feel comfortable talking to me, and including like putting people on part-time arrangements or different flexible options that I don't think people even realized were available to them. The trade-offs thing really resonates with me. I felt like I kind of got my shit under control, and then I had a baby, and now it's like totally out of control again. So like all the self-care and all the things, and like creating my own boundaries and recognizing like when my stress levels were starting to have a physical impact on me, and like, you know, I have a small hourglass. It's like a 5-minute hourglass on my desk, which is really pretty. It's purple, and like, you know, I regularly, if I start to feel myself just hitting a level of stress, like I just flip it over. Well, I told that story in the town hall, and then I ended up, a ton of people asked me, so I bought them. But these are like really small things. And, you know, I think the biggest driver of change has to be the conversation. To me, the fact that people are speaking about it and speaking about it openly. And then I do think there's some generational things where, you know, the only difference between me and like pretty much everybody else is that I'm talking about where my challenges are, and other people just aren't. And there's definitely I see a major difference between even like the folks that are coming out of law school now, who are very open and willing to talk about their mental health and the challenges that they face, and have boundaries, and there are certain trade-offs that they're not willing to make. And I feel like, at least in our organization, that that is going to drive change in a lot of ways. And so, but it's not easy. It's not. It's hard for people to even understand what change might look like, let alone seeing like real change happen. And so I'm seeing it happen, for individual people, but organizationally, I think it's much more challenging to.
I have this line that I say to myself sometimes, which is, I was saying it on my walk down here, you gotta be gawky to get graceful. Because there is a gawkiness to talking about these things. You can feel like you have braces and a perm when you first start talking, and you may say it in awkward ways in a parents group that is meeting to talk about meditation, and for some reason you decide to tell all of them that you have an anxiety disorder. That may happen. But once you've done that a few times, and your husband is like nudging you and like, you start to learn how to resonate with the people that you're talking to, and you start to get more comfortable with it. And then you become, ideally, and I'm not there yet, Yoda. Like, you are beyond caring about what you look like. So I say all of that to say that I have been gawky in every work relationship, because I have had to say at some point, I work on this mental health just even saying mental health, then they like trail away, they question, but then winning them over again. This is, as you say, you guys are exactly right, is a relationship by relationship, a long-term work. I'm 5 years in on having these gawky conversations. Now I'm here, now I'm in front of the room, but like this does take a really long time to start to figure out, but it's so worth it.
I think there's a lot of different steps you can take. I mean, the first one can just be letting people know there's this thing called accommodations. And talk to your HR person about an accommodation that might be worthwhile talking about. And then you can open up a little more, maybe with a lunch and learn or something with mindshare partners coming in and talking about what are the different things that the spectrum of mental health, that it's for everything from a very chronic severe diagnosable condition to just different changes in mood, and how can that feel, and how can you understand that in the workplace, to going deeper. I had a boss who was like, let's get therapists on site, or a therapist. And I was like, therapist is like a very personal relationship. I don't know if we're just gonna get one for the entire office. And that was an interesting moment to me, to be like, oh, I'm actually using my own situation as an informed thing to say it was a well-meaning thing. But I'm like, if we just get one therapist, I don't think that that's going to solve the problem. And people might feel super comfortable going to therapy at work. But it's an idea, and I liked it. But it's being able to have those conversations. You can go that far, or you can have employee resource groups that are based around mental health, or just disability, or any of these things, these cognitive differences that we have, and have it be a constant part of the conversation. There's lots of ways to do it, big and small. But the first thing is always talking about it.
So I want to open it up for questions from you all. As a reminder, for all of the Q&A today, we're looking for questions. There will be time for comments. It is not now. And I think what we'll do is just take 2 or 3 questions, if you could keep them brief. Take 2 or 3 at once, and then come back to the panel with them. So anyone have a question they want to ask either the whole panel or to a specific person? Yeah. Try speaking loud. If not, I'll just do some sprinting. So a question about triggers, about intersectionality, and about labels as well. Take it away.
Maybe I'll start with the intersectionality one, because I think that's, all diversity inclusion initiatives in my mind should be informed by intersectionality. That was actually one of the reasons why the whole therapist idea was like, ooh, people oftentimes want to see a therapist who can relate to their issues. For me, like, I want to see a gay man therapist, because I know that I'm not going to have any stigma or shame talking about anything that happens in my life, because that's important for me. And so that was part of my thing too, was making sure that understanding that mental health is not just like anything, and it impacts different communities differently. It's more open in certain cultures and certain areas to talk about these things, to have a therapist or not. And so I think it's always, in any initiative you do, is couching it in intersectionality. You'll have a better outcome. Like I certainly know I'm privileged as a white man to be able to get up here and talk about it, that I have certain things I can do that maybe wouldn't be afforded to me if I had a different identity. So I think it's always about informing it within those things, but then also seeing where you can find the commonalities that affect all people, but then acknowledging the differences. In this community, it might be viewed this way, and have people share their own experiences if they feel comfortable. Making sure you have different voices present at the table is always really, really important, in my opinion.
That was awesome. So I'm privileged in multiple ways, but two main ways that's relevant here. First, I'm a white guy, right? Secondly, I'm a CEO of a company that I can make the change, right? Not everybody's in the position to kind of make changes that they want. There's a whole level of bureaucracy that you have to deal with on top of it. That's what I love about, and I'm honored to be in a position to do that. And I think from a leadership perspective, it's up to the leaders to create a culture of openness, right? And that's why I'm so bold in talking about something that's so authentic to me, which is my anxiety, right? Because my anxiety, labeled however you want to label it, it opens up to all other conversations, right? So I have anxiety. What do you have, right? What are you going through? Because one thing that I've learned over the years is that I don't walk in your shoes. I don't walk in a black woman's shoes, right? But if we learn from each other, and if we empower everyone within our organization, because that's the type of organization that I want to grow, not only can we learn each other, we can be great from each other, but we could solve some serious problems together, right? And what I found is the product comes out better that way, right? Because everybody loves to work with each other. We're rallying around a vision, and everybody's got different issues. So I think it's the culture issue. And it's sort of like asking yourself, like, what type of culture as a leader do you want to create, right? And that's something that I'm very methodical over, I'm very thoughtful over, and I'm very, humble that I'm in a position to make a team, believe in that, infrastructure.
I want to follow on that, and then I'll talk briefly about labels. But I also think that being in a leadership position can make it challenging, because if you're the person that's making personnel-related decisions or communicating challenging messages, it also can make you a challenging person to come to with a concern or an issue, no matter how hard you try to drive the message that you have an open door on those kinds of things. And so that's something that I personally struggle with, and why I think having like an employee resource groups, which hopefully we're going to do at my firm, is so important, because I think that the change has to be driven at all levels. But on the label thing, I struggle with this a lot, because I've been having these conversations with different stakeholders at my organization, and people will say things like, well, that's wellness, and then this is mental health, and then that, like, and then I see a slide deck and it's like mental health, and I'm like, well, I don't know what to do with the mental health thing, because in a way I think it's very important that people talk about it, and that it's not a stigmatized concept. But on the other hand, I do think that term is a barrier for people for some reason, and they see it and they're like, that's a mental health, and they're much more comfortable talking about wellness. But then you bring in so I struggle with that. It's like, do you meet them where they are and call it something else? Do you challenge them and call it mental health, which is what it is? But the number of times that people say to me, like, well, mental health's not relevant to me, but I understand that other people have issues with mental health. And I'm like, what does that mean? I don't understand. Are you a triathlete of the mind? Like, are you? So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is with labels, and I struggle with it a lot. When we're talking about like what our communication strategy is going to be around initiatives and things, it's like, I don't know what to call it. But I think that I don't know how much it matters. I don't know. That's I guess a question for you guys. Like, does it lose its power if you don't kind of name it and call it what it is, or are you running the risk of, I don't know.
I think everyone that we talk to about these issues has to go through their own learning curve with it, and it does take time. And a lot of the information that someone who's new to the topic gets is from us, how we talk about it, how we feel about it. They're looking for cues. This is not something that gets talked about a lot, so how am I supposed to feel about it? Likewise, when I hear a question about triggers, I think that comes from a place of insecurity. That comes from a fear that if I talk about mental health, I may trigger someone. But the truth is, if you go into this with a growth mindset, which some of us are in the tech world, so we hear this a lot, but if you do think about it that way, if you think, I don't have an answer, I'm just looking to learn, I'll try something new after, then triggers become less relevant. And I think even labels become less relevant because over time, and it does take time, people start to hear the information in a different way. They are not falling into these little pitfalls of their own bias against that label.
I think the labels and triggers are actually a really rich topic, and I think they intersect in some ways. So for me, it's really thinking about, labels. If I say I have a disability, that does provide a different, at least HR code word for me to sort of know I have to approach this a little bit differently. If someone says I'm struggling, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling really stressed. So I think labels are important, but I think they can like obfuscate the situation quite a bit. So I think there's importance in labels in terms of protection, but when someone's talking about it, I just try to let them use whatever language they feel comfortable using. I don't care. I'm everything from disabled to cognitively different to just crazy. Yeah, whatever. To fabulous. But more than just that, but I think it also goes into the trigger conversation because, it's always the worry, I'm going to say the wrong thing, so I don't want to talk about this thing because if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to be labeled that person. So I think if you're thinking about values, how can you work the tension on that? How can you create, my values is to create a place where people can ask hard questions and can make mistakes, and we assume good intent. But then also know that, if someone asks you to stop doing something or changing that behavior, if it's, generally sort of recognized, how do you create space for that too? So I think that's a really important conversation in all sort of D&I work, because if we can't have the uncomfortable conversations, we're never going to get past the surface.
Thank you. One thing I'll just add that we think about at Mindshare Partners is when we work with companies, we are meeting them where they're at to some point. Every company has some initiative. It's wellness, it's mindfulness, it's physical health, it's whatever it is, and mental health can be a part of all of those things. But what we found is if the word mental health is never said, it's going to increase the stigma. Talking about only wellness and never saying the word mental health or depression or diagnosis for people who are experiencing that are gonna feel like that doesn't apply to them. But if you can use that door of, great, you have initiative on wellness, let's work with that. Say mental health here and incorporate it here and here. It starts to normalize, again, a topic that people don't have the words around, but in a context that they're cool talking about, wellness or something similar. There was someone in the back who really wanted to ask a question, I feel like. Let's take your question and then we'll do a close.
It might be a mental health or anxiety thing, but fighting, I don't know if fighting's gonna work. I think you just have to live with it for a while, and it will change over time. I hate that my answer over and over is it takes time, but it really, these things just have to sort of burn with you as they go.
Talk to other people. I found in my experience that almost everyone has imposter syndrome of some sort, unless they're some sort of sociopath and think they're amazing, imperfect, but even then. So, and once again, am I stigmatizing by saying sociopath? Now, see, I'm already working on myself. But yeah, it's these things again of if you listen to other people, so much of my mental illness is what I'll say, is wrapped up in thinking that no one can understand how I feel. Because if anyone felt this bad, why would anyone, why? No one could feel this bad. But when I talk to other people and realize, oh no, I'm not alone. Other people are feeling this. It does give me a lot of that power and goes, okay, I'm just going first. But it doesn't mean that there aren't 100 other people behind me who are feeling exactly the same way and probably worse or more or whatever, and how can I be there for them? That gives me the strength to kind of move forward in those situations.
Let's just take a final moment, if y'all have any advice or final statement that you want to share with the group before we close.
Well, first off, thank you so much, guys. Like, this is awesome. I'm learning from you guys, and it's awesome. And thank everybody for coming here, because it encourages us to talk about this stuff. I mean, I've been on panels talking about all types of shit. You know, this is like, and I get anxiety, right? So I get anxiety like talking. But here I was like, this is great. Like, because I'm talking about something that's like super, like, there's nothing I can mess up. You know, there's nothing I can say wrong. This is like real inside my bones. It's here. So I encourage you to do the same. You know, don't hide it. You know, there's no purpose for it, right? If you're hiding it, you're not only doing an injustice to yourself, but you're doing an injustice to everybody around you, especially if you're in a leadership position, which, you know, like it or not, we probably all are in some ways. So that's my advice. Talk about it, and obviously be super empathetic to the fact that your level is totally different than somebody else's.
My advice is to try to find the thing that makes you laugh. And that is just simply what I have learned. This is just my own path, but take it if this is useful, throw it away if it's not. But I think that if you can find the people in your life that make you laugh about how you're feeling, if you can make yourself laugh, then you are creating a protective cocoon around yourself that will serve you well every single day.
My general feeling is that give yourself a fraction of the empathy you might have for other people when it comes to anything, really, honestly. If I try to, you know, if I'm beating myself up or feeling a certain way, I try to remind myself, would I ever treat somebody else this way? And in my case, at least, it's always like, no, I would always give someone a lot more leeway than I would ever give to myself. And that those moments are like, okay, I can step back, give myself a little bit of empathy, and then move forward.
I'll take two. No, I mean, so I see myself as like a little bit of an experiment in my own organization, and I'm happy to be kind of experimenting on myself that way. But, you know, I think the only, like, if I'm not authentic and I'm not true to myself, then what's the point of working the amount that I work and dealing with the stuff that we deal with? And for me, it's about creating an environment where, you know, other people can also be themselves, and whatever that means for them, and like whatever their issues are, or whoever they are, whatever their challenges are. And so that's what I kind of remind myself on a day-to-day, like whatever the issue is, like I'm just gonna be who I am and be honest about it. And, you know, if my clients decide they can't put me in front of their board of directors because, you know, I admitted X, Y, and Z, or, you know, whatever it is, then that is what it is. But I don't actually believe that that's what's going to happen. And I think that by modeling that behavior, I'm hoping that that will help create an environment where other people feel more comfortable being authentically themselves, and know that that's not going to be a hindrance to their success. And to your point, hopefully it actually adds to your success and, you know, creates an environment that's just better.
Please join me in thanking these 4 wonderful panelists today.